deadly house fire in Boise, Idaho claims the lives of a father and his 2 young stepchildren. As investigators sift through the ashes for answers, they uncover evidence that the blaze was no accident. In Northern California, a man is reported missing, and all indications suggest a tragic accident is to blame. But a routine investigation soon exposes a web of deception, fraud, and possibly murder. When money is at stake, some predators will stop at nothing to exploit another's trust. But even the most complex schemes can't survive the scrutiny of those determined to find justice for victims who have been fatally betrayed. Nestled in the western foothills of the Rocky Mountains, Ada County, Idaho is home to the state capital of Boise. It is also home to some 400,000 residents who work, live, and play here.
This is the fire department.
In the pre-dawn hours of February 10th, 1992, emergency dispatchers received a 911 call. A man reported that his house, a 2-story duplex, was on fire, and he believed a family of 4 who shared the house was still trapped inside. Within minutes, firefighters and emergency units from the surrounding area responded to the call. Fire and smoke consumed the duplex. Firefighters struggled to bring the first-floor blaze under control. Rescue workers fought their way through the flames and thick smoke to see if anyone had been trapped inside. In a second-floor bedroom, they discovered a man lying motionless on the bed. A young girl was found on the floor a few feet away. As the search continued, firefighters recovered the body of a young boy in a nearby bedroom. All of the victims were rushed outside for treatment. But despite the rescue workers' efforts, all 3 were pronounced dead at the scene. The man who lived in the separate residence inside the duplex told police that around 4 a.m. he was awakened by his smoke alarm. He tried to wake up the other family, but got no response. He identified the victims as 34-year-old Randy Rowe and his 2 stepchildren. He didn't know the whereabouts of the children's mother, Robin Rowe, who also lived at the residence. Then, 2 women arrived at the scene. One identified herself as Robin Rowe. Visibly shaken by the news, emergency workers escorted the young mother away from the house. Her friend, Joan McHugh, told police that Robin had fallen asleep at her house earlier that evening. Robin had awakened her just a short while earlier and wanted to return home. She had a premonition that something bad had happened to her family. All of the victims' bodies were removed from the scene and transported to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. Now, Fire Marshal Doug McGrew began looking for clues to tell him how and why the fire started.
We started looking into the ignition source of the fire by doing, like we do on all fires, we do an exterior walk around of the building, we look and see where the least damage is, we go there, and we start working towards the areas where the most damage occurred. Once we get into that area, then we start digging down through and layering through the debris and trying to determine exactly what ignited the fire.
Almost immediately, investigators made a strange discovery. The circuit breaker that controlled power to the family smoke alarm was in the off position. But that did little to explain how the fire started. And because the damage was so extensive, finding those answers would take time. Within hours, autopsies were performed on Randy Rowe and the two children. The medical examiner found lethal amounts of soot and carbon monoxide in each of the victims' lungs and mucous membranes. He concluded that all three had died as a result of smoke inhalation caused by the fire. As the search for the fire's cause continued into the morning hours, arson investigators sifting through the ashes made a troubling find. On the carpet and in a charred pile of laundry, they discovered burn patterns suggesting a flammable liquid had been poured over the area. And the spot was just inches away from vents that circulate air throughout the residence. Investigators collected several pieces of the charred remains for further analysis. All indications were pointing to arson. And that suggested that the fire that had claimed the lives of the two young children and their stepfather had been intentionally set. To find out, State Fire Marshal Don Dillard delivered the charred samples collected from the house to the Idaho State Police Crime Lab, located in Pocatello. By comparing a burned sample believed to contain an accelerant to one that was untouched by the fire, he hoped criminologists could find answers.
What I've asked our criminologists to do is to compare the two, what we feel the one to be evidence, and then the one that we feel probably doesn't have any kind of an accelerant on it, and she compares those two, and by doing that, hopefully comes to the conclusion that there either is or isn't an accelerant involved in the case.
Forensic examiner Susan Williamson began testing the samples for the presence of an ignitable liquid. First, Williamson inserts a strip of charcoal ribbon in the sealed cans that contain the charred samples. Then, the can is placed in a chamber and heated for several hours. If any flammable substance is present, the heat will turn it into vapor, which will then be absorbed by the charcoal strip. Once the evidence has been heated, the charcoal strip is removed from the can. To transform any trapped vapors back into a liquid, solvents are then added to the strip. The resulting liquid is then subjected to sophisticated detection equipment that measures for the presence of known flammable substances. When the process was completed, Williamson analyzed the results.
One of the samples contained an ignitable liquid. And in this case, I identified a heavy petroleum distillate. And heavy petroleum distillates include things like kerosene, number 2 and number 1 diesel fuel, and fuel, heating fuel oil, and so forth.
The analysis had exposed the deadly fire as an act of arson. And more disturbing, it had exposed a triple homicide. Forensic examiners had exposed a house fire in Ada County, Idaho that had claimed 3 lives as a triple murder. The findings were passed on to homicide investigators. Looking for answers, detectives turned to Robin Rowe, the wife and mother of the 3 victims. When asked why she wasn't at the residence on the night of the fire, Robin explained she had been staying at her friend's house. Over the past few months, her marriage had been falling apart.
Well, that was the strange thing.
In fact, Robin believed that her husband Randy might have intentionally set the deadly fire. She said that recently, Randy had become increasingly abusive toward her. The smallest things would set him off, and he couldn't seem to control his anger, even in front of the children. Robin claimed that on one occasion, Randy had struck her so hard she was forced to go to the hospital. Several hours before the fire, Randy had called her at her friend's house and demanded that she come home. When she refused, he threatened that she would never see him or her children again. Though it appeared Randy Rowe had made good on his threats, the story troubled veteran detective Gary Rainey.
Well, there have been some things in the past.
Any parent is protective over their children, and had he been this abusive parent, any reasonable spouse would have wanted to remove the kids from that situation. Her story was that he was only abusive with her and not with the kids. That's not the norm, and certainly in law enforcement we recognize that that abusive personality, that violent personality, the anger control problems is not going to just be focused on one particular person, especially with those pre-teen age kids who sometimes anger parents pretty easily.
With their suspicions raised, police wanted to learn more about the Rose marriage and corroborate Robin's alibi. They began with Joan McHugh, the woman who had been with Robin at the time of the fire.
Well, there was some abuse problems.
Because of Randy's abuse, Robin, she said, had been staying with her. That night, Robin had fallen asleep on her couch around 11 p.m.
And then,
Joan went to bed a short while later and never heard anything to suggest Robin ever left the apartment. Joan had no doubt that Robin was a victim of domestic violence.
and she said that it had been going on for quite a while, but she had never said anything to anyone. And it just seemed to escalate over a period of, I don't know, about 4 or 5 weeks. And a few times she came here, 10 or 11 o'clock with the children, because they were escaping from Randy.
The information gave Robin Rowe a solid alibi for the time of the 3 deaths. And the result of the forensic analysis had made it plausible that Randy Rowe had in fact killed himself and his 2 stepchildren in a vengeful act of rage. But that theory would not go unchallenged.
I learned that there had been some domestic violence going on. But then as a couple other people called, and I learned that there wasn't domestic violence going on according to them. And so it just started not adding up very well.
To learn more, police brought in Randy Rowe's sister to answer questions.
Any signs that Robin or the kids were the victims of any kind of violence, any bruises by anybody?
She didn't believe that Robin was the victim of domestic violence, as she had portrayed herself to be.
Never any discussion?
Though Randy and Robin had begun to fight more and more, he was not a violent person. The kids were Randy's life. His sister knew that he never would have harmed them. And according to the sister, Robin treated Randy as little more than her kid's babysitter. As a result, Randy talked openly about the possibility of divorce. But he loved the children as if they were his own. And the kids made it clear that they didn't want Randy to go.
The children had at one time reportedly told Robin that they wanted to stay with Randy and not go with her. And of course they were Robin's natural children and not Randy's.
To resolve all of the conflicting information about the couple, investigators decided to take a closer look into Robin Rowe's background. What they found was shocking. According to records, Robin had tragically lost a son nearly 15 years earlier. Her 6-year-old boy had died in a suspicious fire at her California home. Arson investigators were never able to determine a cause of the fire. But for Idaho police, the similarities between the tragedies had to be more than coincidental. Robin Rowe was now emerging as the prime suspect in the deaths of her husband and 2 children. But with an airtight alibi and no obvious motive to explain such an unthinkable crime, police knew that proving it would not be easy. Police in Ada County, Idaho, struggled to find answers in a deadly house fire that had claimed 3 lives. Robin Rowe, the wife and mother of the victims, had an airtight alibi for the night of the murders. But all of the evidence was pointing to her as the prime suspect. What investigators needed was proof. Looking for potential clues, they began reviewing statements made by Robin's friends and family.
Husband's kids.
They found that one friend had stated that a few days prior to the fire, Robin had mentioned that she had rented a storage unit and had taken some of her belongings there. The timing of the rental was too close to the murders for police to ignore. Detective Gary Rainey followed up on the lead. Soon, he was able to locate the unit that Robin had rented. With a warrant in hand, investigators were dispatched to the storage unit. There, they found boxes of personal papers belonging to Robin. Among the items was an envelope filled with several $100s in cash and bingo receipts from the YWCA where Robin Rowe worked. Police also collected several life insurance policies taken out on Robin Rowe's husband and her 2 children. Robin was listed as the sole beneficiary on all of the policies, and she stood to gain more than $275,000 from the 3 deaths. It was powerful circumstantial evidence of murder.
One of the most disturbing facts being that she took out the last 2 policies. She already had multiple policies, but Robin took out the last 2 policies on the children January 24th, and the fire was February 10th.
Still, it wasn't enough to take Robin Rowe into custody. Police began interviewing Robin's co-workers at the YWCA. The manager was surprised to learn that cash and receipts had been found in the storage facility. Robin had reported that proceeds from the Y's last bingo game had been destroyed in the house fire that killed her family. Though authorities lacked hard physical evidence of murder, they now had proof of embezzlement. The prime suspect in the triple homicide investigation was placed under arrest and charged with grand theft. But police were a long way from proving that Robin Rowe was a cold-blooded killer. Hoping to generate a lead that could destroy her alibi, details of the crime were released through the media. A short while later, police got a tip. A local newspaper delivery man called and told police that he remembered something unusual on the night of the fire. He said that while making deliveries around 4 a.m. that morning, he saw a car driving away from the duplex. He wasn't sure of the make of the car, but he described it as a late model four-door with rectangular taillights. Detective Ken Smith asked the delivery man to come down to the station.
We had, prior to his arrival at the sheriff's office, had arranged to have vehicles similar to Robin Rowe's vehicle in the back lot, and Robin Rowe's vehicle was in the back lot. We walked him into the lot and asked him to look for vehicles that, or look and see if there were any vehicles that matched the description of the vehicle that he had seen in the subdivision on the morning of the fire. When he observed Robin Rowe's vehicle, he immediately pointed to that vehicle and stated that it was the same body style, same color, and resembled the car that he had seen.
You sure? Definitely.
The witness had placed a car similar to Robin Rowe's near the crime scene just a short while before fire consumed the duplex. Detectives still had to overcome a major obstacle. Robin's friend, Joan McHugh, had provided her with a solid alibi for the time of the homicides. Though police didn't think Joan was lying, they theorized that Robin had managed to slip out of the apartment undetected. Detective Gary Rainey was determined to find out.
I devised a scenario to try to prove or disprove Robin's presence in the apartment, and that was to have Joan confront Robin with the idea that she got up in the middle of the night, 3:30 in the morning, which was the time that we knew about when the fire started, that Joan would tell Robin that she came downstairs to get a drink of water and Robin wasn't there.
When contacted, Joan McHugh agreed that the next time Robin called her from prison, she would tell her the false story and record the conversation. Joan was only too happy to cooperate.
I'm sure, I really shouldn't speak for Detective Rainey, but I'm sure that he believed that somewhere in the phone calls she would absolutely destroy all of her alibis. And I just knew that she was going to explain everything and he was going to feel like a fool because she was innocent. There is no way a mother kills her children. And so I agreed to tape the phone calls.
On the evening of February 20th, Robin called Joan from prison.
Yeah, it's Robin.
There's something that I have to talk to you about. That morning, I came downstairs and you weren't here, Robin. Where were you?
Yeah, I know. I went outside.
It wasn't the answer she expected. Robin repeated her story that at around 3:30 a.m., she was awakened by a strange premonition that something bad had happened to her family. But now, she added that she then contacted a psychiatrist and left the apartment to speak with her for over an hour. On tape, Robin had destroyed her alibi. Joan McHugh was devastated.
It was terrible. And I didn't know what to do after. It was on a tape recording. And it was like, you know, do I call Gary or do I just take this thing and throw it in the trash and no one will ever know? But I would have known. And it probably sounds dramatic, but Randy and the children deserve better than that. So I called Gary.
Police finally had enough evidence to charge Robin Rowe with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Based on the evidence, detectives believe that in the early morning hours of February 10th, Robin Rowe slipped out of her friend's house and returned to her own home. She turned off power to the smoke alarm. Then, driven by a twisted desire to cash in on her family's life insurance policies, she placed a pile of laundry near the air vents and set the deadly blaze. After murdering her husband and 2 children, Robin calmly returned to Joan McHugh's house to establish her alibi.
Psychological experts have described to me that it's simply a balance in her mind of what she personally is better off with. A husband and 2 children or the proceeds of life insurance policies and the opportunity to move to a new state, and that she simply weighed those two things and decided that the money and the new life was what she wanted today.
Robin Rowe was convicted of arson and 3 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of her husband, Randy, and her 2 children. She was sentenced to death. Idaho police had to reconcile conflicting information to find the truth. In California, detectives must follow a complex maze in order to expose a murder. Known for its temperate climate and lush farmland, Yolo County, California offers a quiet rural lifestyle, miles outside the state capital of Sacramento. But residents there are no strangers to tragedy. On the morning of February 5th, 1997, 911 dispatchers at the Yolo County Sheriff's Department received a call from a concerned mother.
Do you have a responsible on that?
She feared that her son was missing. Deputies responded to the home. Patty Howard told the officer that she hadn't seen or heard from her 18-year-old son, Nick, since the previous evening. Patty said that the night before, Nick had helped her close up the auto body shop that the Howard family owned. As they were leaving, Nick said he had to retrieve a wallet he had left behind at a nearby restaurant. He told his mother he would be home in a couple of hours and said goodbye.
He does have long, dark sideburns.
But around midnight, Nick called and left a message on the answering machine. He said he was having car problems and was running late. But he never made it home that night. The family was very close, and it was completely out of character for Nick not to call and check in. Missing teenagers often turn up within a few days. But for Yolo County Detective Larry Cecchetini, Nick Howard didn't seem to fit the profile of a typical runaway.
This is probably one of the closest knit families that I've ever seen. They just, from all indications, they were a very close, very loving family. For Nick to call and not come home was just something that had never happened before.
Investigators feared the teenager's car troubles had led to an accident. Police, friends, and family retraced his usual route. But after 2 days, the search had turned up nothing. Then, 2 men out on the search flagged down a patrol car near the banks of the Sacramento River. They had discovered tire tracks that led from the shoulder of the road down toward the riverbank.
Right down up here? Right over here. Why do you think these are Nick's?
I figured nobody else would be laying those tracks down there. I don't know.
One of the men, 42-year-old Ralph Marcus, said he was a close friend of the Howard family.
Charles 22, I think we have a 972 that went over the cliff. If you could start dart.
10-4.
Ralph said that he and his associate, Jake Stanton, were out looking for Nick when they came upon the tracks. Unsure if the discovery was related to Nick's disappearance, Detective Cecchetini was contacted. He knew that stretch of highway well, and the news was not encouraging.
That's what I was thinking. This strip of roadway is a winding strip of river road. There are no guardrails on our county side. Quite frequently, inattentive or sleepy drivers do go into the river.
Search and rescue units from the Yolo County Sheriff's Department and officers from the California Highway Patrol responded to the scene. The team followed the tracks down an embankment. They led to the water's edge and then disappeared into the river. Members of the Yolo County Boat Patrol and rescue divers began scouring the river. After several hours of searching, divers signaled they had found something. 16 feet below the surface, they had discovered a vehicle resting on the riverbed. A tow truck pulled the car from the muddy river. The vehicle matched the description of the one driven by Nick Howard. A wallet recovered from the passenger seat contained the driver's license of the missing teenager. Examiners began searching the vehicle for clues. On the floorboard, they found Nick's prescription eyeglasses. They were bent, as if his head had violently impacted the dashboard or the steering wheel. Then, police noticed that a film of oil coated the vehicle's interior. It appeared to have come from an opened container of motor oil located in the back seat. The vehicle was towed to a police impound lot for a more thorough examination. Officers and divers from the boat patrol continued searching the area for any signs of Nick Howard. But there was no trace of the teenager. And if he was unconscious and not wearing his seatbelt when he went into the river, the powerful currents had likely carried his body miles away. With so many unanswered questions, police looked for clues to explain the accident. But aside from the tire tracks at the side of the road, little else was found.
Usually if the vehicle went into the water at a high rate of speed, you're going to have a lot of broken rocks, you're going to have debris, possibly some skid marks, some significant physical evidence.
As the investigation continued, detectives received some unexpected information. Nick Howard's family had handed over some papers they found while going through his room. One was a life insurance policy in the teenager's name that was worth $850,000. There was also an uncompleted change of beneficiary form that listed Ralph Marcus, the man who had discovered the tire tracks at the river, as the new beneficiary. Police were surprised that someone as young as Nick Howard would have such a large insurance policy.
Essentially, he was spending a quarter of his monthly income on a life insurance policy, which struck us as odd. It's not something that, life insurance just isn't something that an 18-year-old thinks about, especially when it costs that amount of money. Why don't you have a seat right there?
And that wasn't the only troubling news. An acquaintance of Nick Howard's came forward with information.
Tell me about Nick's life insurance.
He believed that Nick was alive and well. Recently, he said, the teenager had boasted that his life insurance policy would make him a millionaire.
He had this big policy.
All he had to do was fake his own death, disappear, and then have Ralph Marcus collect on the policy. A polygraph test later confirmed he was telling the truth. The frantic search for a missing teenager had taken an unexpected turn. Now, investigators had to consider that Nick Howard had staged the auto accident and his own disappearance. To find out, police enlisted the aid of the California Highway Patrol's Accident Reconstruction Unit. Using the tire tracks found by the side of the road as his guide, investigator Steve Walker surveyed the scene. Detailed measurements indicated that the car had left the road at a 45-degree angle. and there was no evidence of vaulting or bouncing onto the shoulder. That suggested the car was traveling no faster than 14 miles per hour when it left the road. It was unlikely that a sleeping or inattentive driver had caused the vehicle to end up in the river. And there was no evidence suggesting that a collision had taken place.
There was no debris, there were no fluids, stains on the roadway. There was nothing that you typically see in a traffic collision. It was very, very anomalous. And it likewise fit the idea that the car had not departed from the roadway in a violent manner, that it was set up to leave the roadway in a more controlled manner.
Police next examined the engine of Nick Howard's car, looking for any mechanical problems that could explain the accident. Almost immediately, they found a clue. A plastic bottle cap had been intentionally wedged into the engine's throttle, holding it open. And the cap had originated from the opened container of motor oil recovered from the vehicle's interior. With their suspicions raised, police turned to auto expert Charles Radford of the California Highway Patrol. To determine the significance of the findings, he conducted an experiment. He wedged the cap into the throttle of a car with a similar manual transmission engine. He put the car in gear and then turned on the ignition. The engine revved up to 6,000 RPMs and then lurched forward.
And we could get speeds in second of as high as 20 miles an hour, and in fourth gear it was approximately 15 miles an hour within a 100 to 150 foot range. What this shows is that it would be very easy for someone to be able to take a car and put it in the river by use of an oil bottle cap.
All of the evidence police had gathered now led them to believe that 18-year-old Nick Howard had in fact staged his own disappearance. And now he was wanted for questioning in the elaborate insurance fraud scheme. But so far, all efforts to locate the teenager had turned up nothing. Police in Yolo County, California continued their search for 18-year-old Nick Howard. While looking for answers, they uncovered evidence suggesting the teenager and his friend, Ralph Marcus, had staged the disappearance. It appeared to be an elaborate scam to collect on a life insurance policy worth $850,000. But with Nick Howard's whereabouts uncertain, police turned their focus to Ralph Marcus, the beneficiary of the insurance policy. A background check on the 42-year-old heightened Detective Larry Cecchettini's suspicions that the disappearance was in fact a hoax and that Ralph Marcus was somehow involved.
Ralph Marcus had done thefts, identity scams, insurance fraud, bankruptcy fraud. He was a drug runner.
Under questioning, Ralph Marcus denied any involvement in Nick's disappearance. And he knew nothing about any insurance scams.
Tell me about your relationship.
Ralph said he had been a friend of the Howard family for years. Nick was like a godson to him. He was shocked to learn that he was the beneficiary of Nick's life insurance policy. Ralph said he wasn't interested in the money. Police sensed he was lying. But with no hard evidence, they had no choice but to release him. The investigation was going nowhere. Then, on February 25th, 1997, 3 weeks after Nick Howard disappeared, Yolo County Police got a break. But it wasn't one they had expected. A man fishing on the Sacramento River had called police after discovering human remains. Less than a mile from where Nick Howard's car was found, police recovered the partially decomposed remains of a young man. The victim, found with a single glove on his right hand, matched the description of the missing teenager. And dental records later confirmed that Nick Howard had finally been found. With no obvious cause of death, the body was transported to the Yolo County Coroner's Office. There, forensic pathologist Dr. Brian Peterson began looking for answers.
Here's some pictures of the body, how we found them on scene.
A close examination of the glove and the clothing indicated that no traces of motor oil were present. And that suggested the victim was not in his car when it went into the water. For Detective Cecchetini, the findings didn't make sense.
A couple of things just didn't add up. For one, the body was wearing one glove, which we thought was somewhat unusual. I remembered that the car was coated with motor oil when we initially located it, but yet there were no traces of motor oil on the clothing. Granted, he'd been in the water for some time, but the traces of motor oil are not going to be entirely washed from the body.
Dr. Peterson next looked to establish a cause of death. Fluid found in the victim's lung suggested Nick Howard had drowned. But there was also something else.
Additionally, there were changes consistent with manual strangulation, bleeding inside the muscles of the neck.
Nick Howard had been murdered. For the Howard family and for investigators, the discovery was devastating. In addition to the tragic loss, it was now clear that Nick Howard had not staged his own disappearance. And Ralph Marcus was now the prime suspect in his death.
Now we have a body. We've pretty much determined that the body was not in the car when it went in. We have an $850,000 potential life insurance payout, and we have the beneficiary, and we're doing everything that we can to make sure that we get to the bottom line on this and get to the truth of what happened.
Police contacted the insurance agent in nearby Sacramento who handled Nick's policy. According to records, Nick came in a few weeks before he disappeared requesting that Ralph Marcus be named the new beneficiary. But he didn't have all of the correct paperwork, and the change was not completed. But Nick didn't seem to understand, and the agent believed that he left that day convinced that his policy had in fact been updated.
In the insurance agent's opinion, when Nick left, he was under the impression that the change was completed and that Ralph Marcus was the beneficiary.
Though incriminating, the information fell short of the smoking gun investigators would need to prove murder. Then they got a break. A witness asked Detective Cecchetini to meet him at a pier on the Sacramento River. Jake Stanton, the man who was with Ralph Marcus when the tire tracks were discovered at the river, believed he had important information about the case. Jake said that shortly after Nick went missing, Ralph had asked for his help in searching for the teenager. While driving along the Sacramento River, Ralph pulled up to the pier. He said it was one of Nick's favorite spots. As they searched the area, Jake saw Ralph Marcus walk to the end of the pier toward a black glove.
As Jake turns around, he sees Ralph ditch the glove off the top of the pier. Before Jake even says anything, Ralph mentions to him, "I was trying to get the glove."
Detectives showed Jake the black glove recovered from Nick Howard's body.
You ever see anything that looks like this?
He was certain it was identical to the one Marcus had kicked off the pier.
Jake was adamant about the fact that Ralph was trying to kick the glove off so that it could not be recovered. The significance of this is that we had never told anybody that when Nick was found, he was wearing one glove.
The information brought police one step closer to proving that Ralph Marcus had murdered 18-year-old Nick Howard. But so far, all of the evidence was circumstantial. Police in Yolo County, California were now certain that 18-year-old Nick Howard had been murdered for his life insurance policy, worth $850,000. All of the evidence suggested that Ralph Marcus, the beneficiary of the policy, was responsible. The suspect was brought in for another interview. Police showed him the black glove that had been recovered from the victim. Though witnesses saw Marcus kick an identical glove into the Sacramento River, he claimed he hadn't seen one like it before. Marcus continued to insist that he had no knowledge of Nick's life insurance policy and was in no way involved in his death. He pointed to the fact that he had gone to great lengths to help find Nick after he disappeared. But detectives believe that Ralph Marcus had only done that in order to divert attention from himself.
Thank you very much.
Authorities obtained a warrant to search the home Ralph Marcus shared with his mother. There, they found several documents relating to Nicholas Howard's insurance policy. And Marcus was in the process of filing a claim for the $850,000. The suspect was well aware of Nick's life insurance policy, something he had repeatedly denied. He was placed under arrest and charged with first-degree murder. Police believe that Ralph Marcus was able to get 18-year-old Nick Howard to agree to stage his own death after making him the beneficiary of his life insurance policy. But Marcus never intended to split up the money. Once the plan was in place, he beat and strangled the teenager, then tossed him into the river to die. After placing the teenager's wallet and glasses inside the vehicle, Marcus rigged the engine of Nick's car with an oil cap and sent the vehicle into the water, hoping his death would appear as an accident. Ralph Marcus was convicted of the first-degree murder of Nicholas Howard and sentenced to life in prison. Greed and self-interest can be strong motivations for murder. And when the killer is cunning, the truth can be elusive. But detectives and forensic scientists are dedicated to finding justice for unsuspecting victims who have found themselves betrayed. In Montana, a murdered woman is found stuffed in the trunk of her car. With little physical evidence to go on, investigators struggle to catch her killer. A seemingly healthy 33-year-old woman dies in her sleep. Tennessee police must determine if her death resulted from natural causes or murder. In Ohio, a woman abandons her husband and 2 children. But a routine investigation reveals that her disappearance may not have been intentional. A well-executed homicide can baffle even the most skilled investigator. But forensic examiners look beyond the obvious to find proof of a killer's guilt and expose the elements of murder. Settled in the heart of Big Sky country, the city of Great Falls, Montana is surrounded by the majestic Rocky Mountains to its west and the Little Belt Mountains to its east. On an October morning, a man hiking along the secluded banks of the Missouri River stumbled upon several ID cards. They belonged to a young woman. Concerned, he alerted police. Deputies from the Cascade County Sheriff's Department responded to the call. At the river's edge, they found additional ID cards belonging to the woman.
Susan Galloway.
Police were familiar with the name. 27-year-old Susan Galloway had been reported missing the previous day. Unsure what to make of the findings, officers from the boat patrol were called in to drag the river. 20 feet from shore, they signaled they had snagged a woman's purse. Inside were more of the missing woman's ID and credit cards.
What'd you find?
There was also $100 in cash. But there were no signs of Susan Galloway. Cascade County Police contacted the missing woman's parents and brought them in for an interview. The family was alarmed when they discovered that their daughter and her vehicle were gone. Susan had recently become engaged, and she seemed so happy.
Would tell me anything.
Her fiance, Craig Smith, was stationed at the nearby Air Force Base.
You did pretty good.
The couple often helped out at the business that the Galloways owned. Susan was a devout Mormon. And though Craig wasn't, he had agreed to convert so the two could marry. The family planned to give the couple ownership of the store as a wedding present. They couldn't understand why Susan would just take off without a word. Veteran detective Ken Anderson was not optimistic.
Well, finding the identification indicated that Susan Galloway did not, in fact, just leave town or drive away in her vehicle without saying goodbye and that sort of thing, because she certainly wouldn't have left her identification and money behind.
Police arranged to interview the missing woman's fiancé.
Hello, are you Craig Smith? Yes, sir.
Craig Smith had no idea where Susan could have gone. He last saw her the night before she disappeared. After leaving a dinner party, Susan dropped him off at his apartment around midnight. He hadn't heard from her since. The detective was curious about a bandage on Smith's hand.
What happened to your hand?
He explained that he had accidentally cut himself with a knife. A few hours after Susan dropped him off, he woke up thirsty. He tried to open a frozen can of orange juice, but was having trouble. He grabbed a knife, but it slipped as he tried to pry open the can. His car wasn't running, and he walked to the Air Force Base where he was stationed to have a medic treat the wound. Police later confirmed he had visited the medic that evening. The search for Susan Galloway was going nowhere. Three days later, a power company employee working at the Rainbow Dam spotted something on a hill across the river. He decided to go check it out. When he arrived at the spot, he found a car that had plunged down the hillside. The vehicle appeared to be caught up on some brush. Police and crime scene technicians were contacted and responded to the scene. A check on the vehicle's tags revealed the car was registered to missing 27-year-old Susan Galloway.
Watch for the evidence.
Sergeant Anderson made his way down the hill. Through the window, he observed a key in the ignition. There didn't appear to be anyone inside. But on the back of the vehicle, he noticed streaks of blood. There was also what appeared to be a footprint on the trunk. Then Anderson took a closer look inside the car.
The rear cushion of the back seat had pulled away from the trunk area, and at that point in time I could see a body inside the trunk of the car.
The woman matched the description of Susan Galloway, and it appeared she had been murdered. Police towed up the vehicle and began searching for clues. Inside the car, technicians found large blood smears on the front passenger seat. They also recovered several shards of broken green glass stained with blood. The exterior of the vehicle was thoroughly photographed. The victim's body was transported to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. The lack of evidence found near the car led police to believe that she had been murdered elsewhere and then brought to the hillside. A dog was brought in to track the victim's scent. A mile from the car, he alerted to a partially dug hole.
Sergeant Anderson, SNR 4, come on up. I think we have a crime scene.
More of the victim's blood was found. It appeared the suspect brought the woman to this spot, finished the kill, and then attempted to bury the victim, but for some reason gave up. The medical examiner confirmed the victim was in fact Susan Galloway. Pieces of green glass from a 16-ounce soda bottle were found embedded in her skull and neck. They had severed her carotid artery, and as a result, Susan had bled to death. Now, detectives had to find out who had murdered Susan Galloway and why. But with few clues and no obvious suspects, they knew it would not be easy. Police in Great Falls, Montana had few clues in the murder of 27-year-old Susan Galloway. The young woman had been brutally beaten with a soda bottle, placed in the trunk of her car, and then sent down a steep embankment. No usable prints were found on the glass or in the victim's vehicle. Hoping to identify a suspect, investigators released details of the crime through the media. A short while later, they got a tip.
He knocked on my door.
A man stationed at the local Air Force base believed he had information.
Asked me
about what time did he come to the room there.
He said that on the night Susan disappeared, he had seen her fiancé, Craig Smith.
about 2 in the morning.
Smith had come by the barracks in the early morning hours.
What's up? I was out with the guys.
He noticed his friend was carrying a bundle of dirty clothing.
I was out with some guys. What's wrong with your hand?
He also noticed a gash on Smith's hand.
Listen, man, I was out with a girl. And
Smith told him he had cut it with a knife. He was on his way to see the medic for treatment and asked his friend for a ride home after that was done. Smith had also told the airmen that he had been out drinking with friends and got stranded.
He had,
In fact, he asked his friend to keep the story quiet because his fiancée, Susan Galloway, wouldn't have been happy about it. The airman's story contradicted Craig Smith's claim that on the night of the disappearance he had gone to bed soon after Susan had dropped him off. Sergeant Ken Anderson was suspicious.
It was almost as though Craig was lying about something, and all of a sudden he became the main suspect rather than the grieving fiancé.
Police looked to corroborate Smith's story. They located the medic who had bandaged his cut hand. He confirmed that Craig Smith had come in to be treated for a cut in the early morning hours of October 23rd. But the medic recalled thinking that the wound was consistent with having been caused by a jagged edge rather than a knife blade, as Smith suggested. Though incriminating, the information fell short of proving that Craig Smith was a killer. Now, looking to tie the suspect to the crime scene, police canvassed the nearby area.
I just have a couple questions for you, if you don't mind.
A clerk at a convenience store remembered seeing Smith and Susan Galloway the night she disappeared. And according to the clerk, they seemed to be arguing when they came into the store. They bought a few bottles of soda and then left.
We're going now.
The clerk showed the officer the type of soda purchased by the couple. They were 16-ounce bottles made of green glass, identical to the glass that had killed Susan Galloway. The information was enough for police to obtain a warrant to search Craig Smith's residence. The suspect continued to deny any involvement in Susan's death. He admitted he and Susan had been in the convenience store that night. And he also admitted that in the past, he had hung out at the area where her car was later found. But Smith denied ever being at the spot where the partially dug hole was found. The place police believe was the kill site. Detectives collected the clothing he wore on the night of Susan's disappearance.
Is that yours too? Yes, that is.
But the items had been recently cleaned.
Is there a shirt in there also, Ken?
Police realized their only hope would be to link Smith to the sneaker print recovered from the trunk of Susan's car. They collected a single pair of muddy shoes. An examination revealed that the shoes seized from Craig Smith were the same size and the soles had the same pattern as those collected from the vehicle. But that alone wouldn't be enough to prove murder.
He had driven her car a number of times. His footprint was in an irregular place on the trunk, but it could have been there.
Police would have to physically place him at the kill site. And all they had to do that was some dirt on the bottom of Smith's shoes.
And it was our belief that if he had been standing in the area of the kill site, he would have picked up soil. It was very sandy and totally different from the mud and soil at the area where the car was pushed over.
Investigators collected soil samples from various locations where the suspect claimed to have been on the night of Susan's disappearance. They also collected samples from the spot where they believed the murder took place. All of the soil was sent to the University of Montana for analysis. There, geologist and mineralogist Jack Warenberg worked the case.
I was to examine crime scene soils, and there was a open burial site, and there were several other small areas that they wanted to be checked out to compare the soil that was present on the suspect's shoe.
Warenberg observed that the soil samples taken from the bottom of Smith's shoe contained tiny pieces of glass, probably from broken bottles. A microscopic analysis also revealed that the sample contained bits of ash that were consistent with having been produced by copper. The samples collected from Craig Smith's yard and from the path he had walked to the base had no such ash. In fact, only samples taken from the crime scene had both the tiny shards of glass and the copper ash. And the reason seemed simple. A few hundred yards from the crime scene, on the banks of the Missouri River, was the site of a copper smelting plant. Warenberg determined that it was the only area in the county where copper ash appears in the soil. Craig Smith had been at the kill site, something he had previously denied. When confronted with the evidence against him, Craig Smith admitted to killing his fiancée. He said he wanted the Galloway family business, but had no interest in being married to Susan. He was charged with first-degree murder. Based on the information, police believe that on the night of the murder, the couple got into a heated argument. Then, Craig Smith viciously attacked his fiancée. He then dragged her to a secluded spot to finish the job and bury his victim. But when that didn't work, he placed her in the trunk of her car and attempted to send the vehicle over the cliff. Craig Smith was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 100 years in prison. A patch of soil was enough for Montana police to expose a killer's dirty secret. But in Tennessee, detectives must look beyond the obvious in order to find answers to explain a mysterious death. In the early morning of December 23, 1997, Nashville police and emergency workers responded to a frantic 911 call. Terry Robinson said his wife had been violently ill for several days, and now she wasn't breathing. She was pronounced dead at the scene. With no obvious cause of death, detectives were dispatched to the home as a matter of routine. Homicide detective E.J. Bernard was assigned the case. 33-year-old Lenora Robinson lay dead on the couple's bed. Investigators noticed a black substance on the woman's shirt and on the pillowcase that seemed to have come from the victim's mouth and nose. It didn't appear to be blood. Perhaps they thought it had originated from a cigarette found next to Lenora's bed. They also found and collected a bottle of Gatorade and a glass filled with the orange liquid. Terry Robinson told the detective that Lenora had been suffering from severe flu-like symptoms for the past 4 or 5 days. In fact, the day before, Terry had taken his wife to a doctor for treatment for a high fever and uncontrollable vomiting and diarrhea. The physician who examined Lenora diagnosed her with a bad case of the flu. He he gave her an injection to relieve the symptoms and sent her home. Terry said that Lenora seemed better for a while, but that night her symptoms worsened.
I hope this knocks it out, whatever it is.
He tried to nurse her, giving her Gatorade and medications. But when he checked on her the following morning, she wasn't breathing. Though there were no signs suggesting foul play, police were troubled that someone as young as Lenora would die from the flu. Detective Bernard ordered that an autopsy be performed.
The initial assumption was that it was something to do with the flu or the shot, or possibly a heart attack, brain tumor, something totally unknown to the family members or anyone, the medical personnel on the scene.
Her body was transported to the Tennessee State Medical Examiner's office located in Nashville. There, Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Bruce Levy performed the autopsy. The thick black substance that had come from Lenora Robinson's nose immediately caught his attention.
Well, in this case, the first thing was there had been noticed some black residue on the pillow next to where her mouth had been, which means that something had come out of her body. We weren't sure exactly what it was.
An internal examination uncovered evidence of a heart condition and congested lungs, supporting the idea that Lenora had died of natural causes. Then, Detective Bernard arrived to view the autopsy. He noticed something unusual.
It smells like almonds or candy.
It does.
It was the smell of bitter almonds coming from the body. It was an odor associated with people who have died as a result of cyanide poisoning. Further examination, however, failed to turn up the telltale signs associated with cyanide ingestion. There was no liver damage and no signs of burning in the mouth or esophagus. Toxicology tests on the Gatorade found near Lenora's bed turned up negative for poison. If the 33-year-old woman had been exposed to cyanide, the question now was how and by whom. An autopsy performed on 33-year-old Lenora Robinson led authorities in Nashville, Tennessee, to believe her death had resulted from exposure to cyanide. To prove it, additional tests would have to be performed. The medical examiner collected blood, tissue, and urine samples. The items were then forwarded to forensic toxicologists. To test for the presence of poison, the samples are mixed with chemicals that react to cyanide. If the poison is present, it will turn a bluish-purple color within a few minutes. The tissue samples turned up negative. But Lenora's blood and urine tested positive for the poison. For cyanide to be absorbed in the blood, but not in the tissue, it would have had to have been inhaled. And according to forensic expert Agent Louis Kuykendall, cyanide is most lethal in a mist-like state.
Typically, the person will have convulsions, the person will have stomach distress, but usually very quickly, 30 seconds to maybe 2 minutes, they're into a coma state and then die very rapidly.
Medical examiner Bruce Levy contacted police with the findings.
It's Bruce. Yeah, I have the results on the toxicology on Lenora Robinson. It is positive for cyanide.
But until police could rule out that the poisoning was accidental or suicide, the manner of death would remain undetermined. Detective E.J. Bernard was quickly able to rule out both of those scenarios.
There was no suicide notes. I learned that she would have died within minutes of ingesting the cyanide. Therefore, she would have left something close by. There was nothing close by. Mr. Robinson assured me that he did not clean anything up.
Stormy.
Police believed Lenora Robinson had been murdered. To find out why, they questioned the victim's mother and stepfather. Both agreed that the marriage had been rocky for some time. According to Lenore's mother, the couple suffered from severe financial problems.
Pay these bills with no money in the account.
The small business that they owned and operated together was not doing well,
A credit card. You're supposed to know.
and the bills continued to pile up.
You gotta pay for it somehow.
It had caused a lot of anger and resentment between Terry and Lenora.
Shall we? Let's see what you've got.
Last year.
Lenora, they said, had recently begun talking about the possibility of divorce.
I will be talking to the two of you in the next trip that they have. Did they have
They had
any
one more
arguments?
piece of information to add. Terry, they said, had once worked as an exterminator, and as part of his job, he had worked with deadly poisons.
He didn't have but a couple because before they married, he had.
Before obtaining a warrant to search Terry Robinson's home, police needed to know if it was possible for him to create cyanide vapor.
You'll actually see it in some of the pesticides, industrial pesticides especially. And so
Agent Kuykendall confirmed that the process is relatively simple.
you might go ahead and collect that.
He gave police a list of items to look out for. Armed with a warrant, police returned to Terry Robinson's home. The suspect maintained his innocence. But as Detective Bernard began sifting through the couple's financial papers, he uncovered a letter Lenora had written to her husband. In it, she threatened him with a bitter and costly divorce. With a list of chemicals that could be used to transform cyanide into vapor, Detective Bernard searched the suspect's garage. There, he found several common household items that could have been used. He also collected numerous containers of unidentified liquid. At the TBI crime lab, Agent Kuykendall began analyzing the substances collected from the home. But the results were not what investigators had hoped for.
Essentially what EJ found and sent to me, none of those had cyanide or enough cyanide at any level that if someone was to ingest it or get them on, that it should harm them.
The investigation was back to square one. To make their case, police would have to rely on the circumstantial evidence. And their best bet would be to prove that the suspect had access to cyanide. Detectives contacted Terry Robinson's former employer at the extermination company where he had worked years earlier.
I need your help.
The man confirmed that while Robinson worked there, the company utilized cyanide. In fact, Terry Robinson helped convert the crystallized poison into a liquid state, which would then be administered with a mister to combat insects and rodents.
Oh, that stuff smells.
The former employer hadn't seen Terry in some time and wasn't aware of any poison he may have taken with him when he left the company.
Yep, that's all there is to it.
Still, Detective E.J. Bernard refused to give up.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you very much. Well, I continued looking for the magic bean, we'll say, to where I could get a receipt where he bought cyanide. I was unable to locate that.
Though police had established motive and opportunity, they had no hard evidence linking Terry Robinson to the poison that was used to murder his wife. And without that, Lenora's murder threatened to remain unsolved. forensic toxicologists in Nashville, Tennessee, had exposed the poisoning death of 33-year-old Lenora Robinson as a homicide. But so far, they had been unable to link her husband, Terry Robinson, to the cyanide gas used to kill her. But then they got the break they needed. Lenore Robinson's great-uncle came in to speak with police.
A few questions, if you don't mind. I believe your name is Roy Blanton.
He recalled that some time ago, Terry had asked for his help in killing wasps that had nested near his home.
Did he pay you for this?
Good to see you. Hi, what we got here?
The uncle agreed and came by the house to give Terry several insecticides and poisons.
One way or the other? Right. Didn't need anything else.
Among the items were cyanide tablets.
Good. Job below. I'll run for it. Okay.
Though the evidence was circumstantial at best, police were able to obtain a warrant for the arrest of Terry Robinson.
About any of these chemicals?
On June 30th, police returned to his home and took him into custody. Terry Robinson was charged with the first-degree murder of his wife, Lenora. Based on the evidence, police believe that Terry Robinson took advantage of Lenora's illness to free himself from an unhappy marriage, heavy debt, and an impending divorce. On December 22nd, he made his way into her bedroom and administered the deadly poison. On October 15th, 1999, 49-year-old Terry Robinson was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 51 years in prison. To trap a killer and make their case, police in Nashville had to rely on both hard science and dogged determination. But some predators have an intimate knowledge of law enforcement tactics, and outwitting them can be a difficult challenge. With a population of less than 8,000 residents, Belpre, Ohio is regarded as a friendly, tight-knit community. And when someone goes missing, it's everyone's business. On September 19th, 1996, Jack McCready came in to speak with Belpre police. Investigators knew him well. McCready was a respected officer with the Ohio State Police. And now he wanted to report that his wife Jennifer had disappeared. He said he last saw his wife that morning as they were getting ready to go to work. Jack said he hadn't noticed anything unusual about her behavior that morning. Though their marriage had its problems, he thought things had improved.
There you go. Thanks. All right, I really got to get
He later learned that Jennifer never showed up to work that day. Jack suspected his wife had been having an affair, and now he feared she had taken off with another man, leaving him with the couple's 2 children. Detective Dave Garvey agreed.
When he got home, the first thing he saw was Jennifer's wedding band on the kitchen counter. He checked the house and found out that there were certain items of hers missing, luggage was missing, and the photographs was missing.
Though police had no reason to suspect foul play, they agreed to look into the case. They began by questioning the McCready's neighbors. One believed he had seen Jennifer leaving the house that morning. Around 10 a.m., he saw Jennifer's Blazer back out of the driveway and screech down the street in an erratic manner. The neighbor admitted that he never actually saw Jennifer's face.
Okay.
But he knew the Blazer was her car, and he had never seen anyone else drive it.
All right, thank you.
Then, a few days later, police received a call that a vehicle matching Jennifer's Blazer had been located in a parking lot. Jack McCready was dispatched to the scene, and he confirmed that it was in fact his wife's car. Investigators searched the vehicle's interior. They found no obvious signs of a struggle or any indications of foul play. Still, the vehicle was impounded for a more thorough analysis. Crime scene technicians scoured the vehicle using luminol, a chemical that can detect invisible traces of blood and other biological evidence. But after hours of processing, the examination revealed nothing to suggest that a crime had taken place. As an adult, Jennifer McCready had the right to be missing. And having found no evidence that she had met with foul play, Belpre police had no choice but to give up on their search for the young mother of two. Detectives in Belpre, Ohio had found nothing to suggest that the missing wife of State Police Officer Jack McCready had met with foul play.
Yes.
All indications suggested the 30-year-old mother of two had simply packed up and left town.
The vehicle that's out there now.
But then, friends of the missing woman contacted police. They were concerned something bad had happened to Jennifer McCready. Jennifer, they said, was dedicated to her children. They were her life. No one who knew her could believe that she would just walk out on her children. And no one believed she was having an affair, as Jack McCready suggested. But Jennifer had been talking about divorcing her possessive and jealous husband. Then, a witness came forward with information. She said that around the time of Jennifer's disappearance, she saw a police vehicle driving in a remote area a few miles outside of town. The officer fit the description of Jack McCready to a T. The woman had provided unreliable information in the past, and at first, Detective Dave Garvey didn't believe this would be any different. But when no additional leads surfaced, detectives decided to drive out to the secluded spot where the woman had seen the patrol car. There, they found something that seemed out of place.
What we can do is...
It was a dirt mound. They shoveled away a few inches of dirt and hit a vinyl cloth. That was followed by the unmistakable smell of death. Crime scene technicians were quickly dispatched to the scene. As the excavation continued, the team unearthed a comforter and a sleeping bag. And wrapped inside were decomposed remains, the head covered with a white plastic trash bag. When the bag was removed, one of the officers identified the female as Jennifer McCready.
What we want to do now is...
She was wearing pajamas. That was at odds with her husband's claim that when he last saw her, she was dressed and leaving for work. As a matter of routine, soil samples were collected from the makeshift grave. Technicians collected the bedding and the sleeping bag for a more detailed analysis. The victim was transported to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. The medical examiner determined that Jennifer McCready had died as a result of a gunshot wound to her head. fatal .357 Magnum bullet was collected and sent to the crime lab. Belpre investigators now had a homicide on their hands. The inconsistent information, in addition to witness testimony, pointed to State Police Officer Jack McCready as the prime suspect.
I've got some bad news for you, Jack.
Detectives arranged to speak with him at the barracks where he was stationed.
You understand?
When they broke the news about Jennifer's death, he was visibly shaken.
You guys as a family, at this point.
But as they began to question him, McCready asked for an attorney and ended the interview. Soon after, Jack McCready was put on leave. Investigators hoped the forensic evidence could tell them more. All of the items collected from the crime scene were sent to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Apprehension Lab for analysis. While processing the evidence, criminalist Michelle Yezzo discovered dozens of synthetic fibers. She also located strands of fiberglass clinging to the inside of the sleeping bag.
Finding the fiberglass insulation within that sleeping bag was something that was very unusual in my opinion, because that would be very itchy, and because of that, that's not something that you would want to have in that sort of context.
Police obtained a warrant to search the McCready home.
I'll let you look it over. Take a look at it.
In the bedroom, they found linens that matched the comforter the victim had been buried in. Several fibers were also collected for comparison with those recovered from the crime scene. In the kitchen, police located a .357 Magnum revolver, the same type of gun used to kill Jennifer McCready. As the search continued, investigators found and collected newly installed fiberglass insulation in the couple's garage. The material appeared identical to the insulation found in the sleeping bag. Then they noticed another potential clue. There were numerous shovels, and some were coated with dirt. Though McCready explained that he had recently done work on his yard, police confiscated the tools. Now, forensic examiners began analyzing all of the evidence. Michelle Yezzo found that the carpet fibers collected from the McCready home shared all the same microscopic characteristics as those recovered from the bedding that the victim had been buried in. All of the evidence suggested the victim was murdered in her own home. But none of it told them who had carried out the homicide. And their best chance of linking Jack McCready to the murder turned out to be a dead end. The gun barrel had been bored out, making ballistic comparisons nearly impossible. Police had underestimated Jack McCready.
I don't see anything in there that says that it was...
The suspect had been clever enough to tamper with the one piece of evidence that could directly tie him to the murder. Or so he thought. Police contacted Richard Bisbing, a forensic microscopist with the private firm of McCrone Associates. He was asked to compare soil samples that were collected from the gravesite, Jack McCready's shovel, and from the suspect's yard.
We analyze soil samples by doing a side-by-side careful comparison of all the details that we can find in the soil itself. The soil differs by color and by the presence of plant material. It differs by its mineral content. It differs by its texture, the particle sizes in the soil grains themselves. And all of those features are compared.
Bisbing began his analysis by comparing the soil taken from McCrady's shovel to samples taken from his yard. But the texture, size, color, and mineral composition of the two samples did not match. But when he compared the soil from the gravesite with the soil taken from the shovel, he found one consistency after another.
We could conclude that the soil from the shovel was similar to the gravesite and could have originated from the gravesite. And we were able to show that the place of the gravesite was different in its soil classification even from the place where the defendant lived, and the soil was different than most places in the county.
A short while later, Ohio State Police Officer Jack McCrady was placed under arrest and charged with the murder of his wife, Jennifer.
1025.
Though police remain unsure what drove him to murder, the evidence suggests that on the evening of September 18th, Jack McCrady shot Jennifer one time in the head. To cover up his actions, he buried her in a remote spot, returned home, and altered the barrel of his gun. Despite his efforts, Jack McCrady was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Some killers will go to extraordinary lengths to distance themselves from their deeds. But no crime is perfect. And sometimes, investigators must rely on a few molecules in order to piece together the elements of murder. Police in Central California find themselves in the midst of a violent crime wave. At first, the deaths appear unrelated. But detectives uncover evidence that points to a single killer. In Virginia, women start turning up dead in their own homes. And it appears a sadistic serial killer is to blame. But until police can identify a suspect, they remain powerless to stop him. When there is no obvious connection between victim and killer, solving a murder can be difficult. But forensic experts can play a vital role in exposing the predator who chooses random targets. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. California's central coastline is famous for its rugged beauty and isolation. But in the early 1980s, the city of Santa Cruz became the backdrop for a series of violent crimes. On April 23rd, rescue workers and police from the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office responded to a call about a vehicle found burning along a rural mountain road. The car had been burning for hours and was completely destroyed. To authorities, it appeared to be the work of vandals. But a closer inspection revealed a much more gruesome act than arson. A human body, burnt beyond recognition, lay in the front seat. The unidentified victim was removed from the burned-out wreckage and transported to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. investigators began searching for clues to explain the fire. But they found none of the telltale signs suggesting that an accident or engine trouble were to blame. A check on the tags revealed the car was registered to 20-year-old Mark Farrell, who listed an address less than a mile from the scene.
1 Frank John Mary.
Detective Sergeant David Deverell oversaw the investigation. The lack of an obvious cause of the fire was troubling.
There was no reason for the car to have caught fire. There was no dynamic crash. It's very unusual to have a body burnt up in a vehicle with no explanation as to how it happens.
Police hoped the autopsy would yield more answers.
This is Farrell.
With Detective Deverell present, forensic pathologist Dr. Richard Mason began his examination by x-raying the victim.
38 wad cutter.
After reviewing the results, it was clear this death was no accident.
I could see evidence of at least 3, possibly 4 bullet pathways through the chest, entering on the right and exiting on the left. There was also a very probable gunshot wound to the head.
The young male victim had been murdered. But the heat of the fire had destroyed any ballistics evidence that may have been left behind. But then, embedded in the young man's chest, Dr. Mason found a single bullet that had somehow survived the intense heat. Dr. Mason, a gun enthusiast, analyzed the fragment under a microscope. It was a unique bullet.
I'm a long-time handgun rifle shooter, and I recognized it immediately as a 38 Special Wad Cutter. They are heavy, they're very penetrative, and they will drill deeply into a body.
Dental records later confirmed that the murder victim was in fact the owner of the burned-out car, 20-year-old Mark Farrell. Now, police had to find out who had killed him and why. Investigators questioned the young man's mother. She couldn't imagine why anyone would have wanted to harm her son. She said she last saw him the previous afternoon.
Let's do that.
Mark, a college student studying to be an engineer, was late for the night shift where he worked as an analyst at a nearby electronics plant. There didn't seem to be anything that was troubling him. Mark was well liked by everyone who knew him. He didn't have any enemies. With no obvious suspects, police looked to reconstruct the last hours of Mark Farrell's life. His employer confirmed that Mark had worked his entire shift the night before and left around 2 a.m. There were no indications that anything out of the ordinary had happened during his shift. And he said Mark got along well with all of his co-workers. The manager handed over the videotape from the company's security camera. At the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office, Detective Deverell reviewed the tapes.
It's the surveillance.
He watched as Mark Farrell left work without incident.
In looking at the tape, there was certainly nothing unusual in it. Looked like, it was the end of the night. He was headed home. There was absolutely nothing in it.
Weeks passed with no additional leads. Soon, the investigation turned cold. And the caseload for Santa Cruz homicide detectives was about to increase. 2 months after the murder of Mark Farrow, the tranquility of the nearby community of Laguna Beach was shattered. The lifeless bodies of 2 men were discovered on the beach. Officers and crime scene technicians were dispatched to the scene.
Right about here. Right. They saw him.
There, they found 2 young Asian men who had both been shot in the back multiple times. Police began processing the scene for clues. In the breast pocket of one of the victims, they found a wallet.
All right. See anything else? Or?
No, that's good. I got the shot. We can put him back down and then
okay.
We'll check the wallet for ID.
Okay.
And inside was identification belonging to a man named Chek Chin, a resident of San Francisco.
You've got some.
Police could find no ID on the second victim.
Craig, is it okay if I come in from this angle here? Right.
His wallet was missing.
You know, it looks like he's got a set of keys.
However, they located a set of car keys. Detectives theorized the double murder was the result of a robbery gone bad. Using the set of keys, police were able to locate the victim's car.
Let's get the distance between 2 and
Based on the vehicle registration, they believed that the second victim was the car's owner, 30-year-old Han Lee, also from San Francisco.
Looks pretty good. So we'll get Dave in here and let him know what we're going to
How's it looking there?
As police began looking for clues to the killer's identity, they noticed one empty spot in the nearby parking lot. And in the space were fresh tire tracks.
Somewhere this guy may have driven, so.
Yeah, so we'll catch this guy and...
Unsure if the killer had left the marks, crime scene technicians collected the evidence using a plaster cast mold. The nature of the double murder troubled police.
It was a really unusual scene for us. We had 2 bodies up here on the trail. Multiple homicide is certainly something we don't see. It's something that concerned us greatly.
The victims' bodies were transported to the coroner's office for autopsy. Again, Dr. Richard Mason worked the case.
Sure. This, when you're done with the overviews, while he's in a position, we'll get the ID shots.
He extracted the fatal bullets from the victims' backs. He had seen them before. They were unique .38 caliber wad cutters, identical to the bullet recovered from the body of Mark Farrow 2 months earlier. Police now had 3 unsolved murders on their hands, and it appeared the same gun had been used in all of the homicides. Dr. Mason and Detective Deverell realized it was too much of a coincidence to be ignored.
It's an unusual gun.
Police in Santa Cruz, California had 3 unsolved homicides on their hands. And the bullets recovered from all of the victims appear to have originated from the same gun. To find out, the bullets were forwarded to ballistics expert Paul Doherty at the San Mateo Police Crime Lab. From the size and diameter, he confirmed that all were .38 caliber wad cutter bullets. Typically, wad cutters are used for target shooting.
A wad cutter is a projectile that's designed to punch a hole in paper for target shooting. So you get a nice clean hole so you can measure your accuracy of your score. In other words, in some cases when you get right on the line, you want to make sure you're cut. If you've cut the line, the score goes higher, and that's what this does. It just cuts a nice clean hole.
Each gun leaves unique markings on a bullet as it travels through the barrel. When examiners compared the bullet recovered from 20-year-old Mark Farrell to the ones taken from the 2 Asian victims found at Laguna Beach, they found that all shared the same characteristics. And after extensive research, authorities determined that the markings left on the bullets had likely been produced by a rare Great Western single-action revolver.
Manufacturer and see if we can't get somewhere with that. Although it becomes a little problematic when you start looking.
It was a promising lead, but it was nearly impossible for police to track down everyone who currently owned the handgun.
I don't think it's a standard manufacturer.
And though it seemed unlikely, Detective Dave Deverell had to consider that the 3 murders were unconnected.
Between that and the gun, get there. You look at it and go, well, maybe the gun got passed from one person to another, and there really is no connection between the cases. That didn't work for any of us. It just didn't make sense that a gun and bullets would somehow transfer from one person to another and be used again in another homicide.
To find out if there was a connection, detectives traveled to San Francisco's Chinatown district, where the 2 Laguna Beach victims, Han Lee and Chek Chin, had lived. It's a notoriously insulated community, and investigators realized that getting information would not be easy. A team from the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office worked the case. Homicide Detective Joe Hennard uncovered a possible lead.
We had information that both victims had worked at the Golden Dragon restaurant in Chinatown, where 2 years prior there was a gangland shooting where a number of people were murdered. We were concerned that there could have been gang activity, that these guys were followed down to Santa Cruz and were shot and killed on the way over to the beach. And an interpreter, Mr. Liu.
Through an interpreter from the San Francisco Police Department's Asian Gang Task Force, the manager of the restaurant described the 2 young men as decent, hard-working employees. In fact, he last saw them the day before they were found murdered. It was payday, and the men were anxious to receive their checks. They had made plans to take a day trip down to Laguna Beach. The manager didn't believe the 2 men were involved in any gang activity. He could think of no one who would have wanted to harm them. Having found no connection between the victims, detectives realized they were powerless to prevent more killings.
We got a photo of our...
Soon, the investigation into the murders of Mark Farrell, Chek Chin, and Han Lee had hit a dead end.
The case was very frustrating. We had the bullets linking the murders. We knew what type of gun we were looking for. We had a lot of evidence in the case, but we didn't have even a glimmer of why these 3 people were killed.
But a year and a half later, all of that changed. A man named Dave Bonin contacted police. His daughter Lynn, he said, was in great danger. She had recently broken up with her boyfriend, Mark Cunningham, and now he was stalking her. The daughter feared for her life. Mark Cunningham had allegedly bragged about killing 3 men a year and a half earlier.
Okay, thanks.
It was the break police had been waiting for. The father took them to speak with Lynn at the grocery store where she worked. His daughter was afraid to speak to police about Cunningham, so he offered to bring her out of the store. But there was just one complication. Mark Cunningham was there, talking to Lynn. Dave Bonin got his daughter's attention and brought her outside. When Detective Dave Deverell heard the suspect was inside, he quickly interviewed Lynn.
And kind of did just the quickest interview on record. You know, we kind of went, Lynn, your dad tells us that your boyfriend may have killed some people, and we need to know what happened.
Lynn told police that a year and a half earlier, she and Mark Cunningham were driving around near Laguna Beach. Suddenly, Mark pulled into a parking spot, claiming he needed cash. He said he'd be right back, but he wouldn't tell her where he was going. Lynn told police he was gone for several minutes. She recalled that when he returned, he was agitated and out of breath. She thought she saw a gun in his possession. Police realized it was the same spot where the two Asian men were found murdered.
It became apparent to us in this real brief interview with Lynn, Mark was the guy we were looking for.
As Lynn finished telling her story, Mark Cunningham exited the store. In a wide-open parking lot, there was any number of ways the suspect could escape. And if Mark Cunningham was in fact the killer, police feared he would not hesitate to use violence. After a year and a half, police in Santa Cruz, California finally had a solid lead in 3 unsolved homicides.
Why don't you guys come on over here?
Mark Cunningham had allegedly bragged to his ex-girlfriend that he was responsible for the shooting deaths. Cunningham was cooperative and taken into custody without incident.
All right, what is this for? I'll tell you this. That's a good start.
Under questioning, he insisted he knew nothing about any of the murders.
I'm sorry, I really...
He claimed that his girlfriend, Lynn Bonin, was trying to get back at him for ending the relationship. He denied owning a Great Western single-action revolver, the type of weapon used in the 3 killings. Police didn't believe him, but they had no hard evidence to prove he was lying. Still, Cunningham remained in police custody. When a few days passed with no additional leads, police turned to his ex-girlfriend for more information. Lynn Bonin had reason to believe that Cunningham had committed the murders.
We just threw it over.
She said that a few days after the 2 men were found murdered at Laguna Beach, Cunningham admitted to the crimes.
What are you going to do about it?
Then, without warning, he pulled out an old revolver and forced Lynn to the ground. He threatened to kill her and her father if she ever said anything to police. A short while later, Cunningham got rid of the revolver.
He just told me to sit there and wait.
Lynn didn't know anything about Mark Farrell, the 20-year-old man who had been shot and burned in his car along a mountain road.
At some point, did Mark leave?
However, in the past, she and Cunningham and some friends would hang out on that road and have bonfires. Cunningham would often brandish his weapon at passers-by who complained about the illegal fires. Police had strong circumstantial evidence linking Mark Cunningham to the scenes where all 3 victims had been found murdered. Now they needed hard evidence. They turned to the tire tread marks found at Laguna Beach nearly 2 years earlier. The tires from the truck that had been driven at the time of the murders had been sold, but police were able to track down the current owners. The tires were collected and forwarded to the crime lab for analysis. First, examiners generated an inked impression of Cunningham's tire treads. Then, transparent overlays were placed on top of life-size photographs of the tire tread found at Laguna Beach nearly 2 years earlier. They found that all of the class characteristics, including the shape, size, and dimensions of the tread design, lined up perfectly. The evidence had placed Mark Cunningham's vehicle at the scene of the double murder. But to tie him to all 3 homicides, they needed to find the murder weapon. Lynn Bonin agreed to help. She brought investigators to the area where she believed the gun had been tossed. It appeared to be a waste of time. But then, buried under dirt and debris, they found a pistol. It was a rare Great Western single-action revolver. To prove it was the murder weapon, police forwarded the evidence to forensic examiners. Ballistics expert Paul Doherty knew it would not be easy. Rust had severely damaged the weapon. But after days of cleaning the revolver, he was able to get the gun to fire.
3, 2, 1, fire! Firing!
Ballistics tests proved that the gun was used in both the Laguna Beach murders and the death of 20-year-old Mark Farrell. Cunningham was subsequently charged with 3 counts of murder. Police theorized that Cunningham had started a small bonfire by the side of the road. Mark Farrell headed home after a long night of work, saw the flames, and stopped to find out what was going on. Without warning, Cunningham pulled his gun and shot the young man several times. In an effort to cover his tracks, Cunningham then doused the car with a flammable substance, then set the vehicle on fire. It was a crime of opportunity, one the killer would repeat several weeks later at Laguna Beach. Mark Cunningham was tried and convicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. Mark Cunningham preyed on victims who happened to cross his path. But in Richmond, Virginia, one killer carefully looked for targets that shared something in common. On the morning of September 19th, 1987, a man noticed a car with its engine running pulled up onto the sidewalk. It appeared the vehicle had been abandoned. The man called police. 911 dispatchers ran a check on the tags and learned the car was registered to a woman who lived a few blocks away from where the vehicle was found. But when efforts to contact her failed, police tracked down her landlord. An officer was dispatched to the residence. The landlord was also concerned. She had noticed a missing window screen and feared the place had been burglarized. Not knowing what to expect, the officer cautiously made his way through the apartment. the bedroom, he made a gruesome discovery. A woman lay dead.
Dispatch, come back.
She had been tied up and strangled. Within minutes, Richmond police and crime scene technicians were dispatched to the scene. The woman, found fully clothed, was identified as 35-year-old Donna Doyle.
Still there, yeah.
No items appeared to be missing. Robbery was not the motive behind the murder. Believing the killer had gained access to the residence through the window, technicians scoured the area for prints. But they found nothing. And the victim's car, which had likely been taken by the killer and then abandoned, yielded no additional clues. At autopsy, the medical examiner determined that the death had resulted from ligature strangulation. The device had been fashioned from a sock, shoestring, and vacuum cleaner pipe. Donna Doyle had been slowly strangled. Though the victim was clothed in cut-off jeans and a shirt, there were indications she had been sexually assaulted. Biological evidence of rape and some stray hairs were collected. At the time, DNA testing was in its infancy, and all serologists could determine was that the killer had type O blood. Homicide Detective Ray Williams was assigned the case. He realized this investigation would not be simple.
I worked homicide for 20-some-odd years in the city, and after looking and reviewing the scene, I knew it to be a very unusual homicide. The way she was tied and strangled was very apparent to me that at that point we weren't dealing with an ordinary killer.
Hoping for more detailed information, the hairs recovered from Donna Doyle's body were forwarded to forensic experts at the Virginia Division of Forensic Science. They determined that 2 of the hairs had not originated from the victim. And from their texture and cross-sectional shape, examiners concluded they had come from an African-American male. For investigators, it wasn't much to go on. To learn more, detectives questioned the employer of a local bookstore where Donna Doyle worked. On the day of the murder, Donna had worked her regular shift. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened that day. She described Donna as a dedicated employee and a very likable person, although she was somewhat shy. After closing the store, Donna headed home. Her employer didn't know if she had plans that night. She believed that Donna lived alone and was unaware if she currently had a boyfriend. After 2 weeks, detectives had no luck identifying a suspect or an obvious motive. The investigation into Donna Doyle's murder was going nowhere. Then, emergency dispatchers received a 911 call. There had been another homicide. As police in Richmond, Virginia struggled to solve the brutal rape and murder of 35-year-old Donna Doyle, they received word of another homicide. The victim, identified as 32-year-old Dr. Stephanie Harris, was discovered inside the bedroom closet by her husband.
Okay.
The scene was less than 2 miles from the site of Donna Doyle's murder.
Right.
hands and feet were bound, and a cloth belt was wrapped tightly around her neck.
What kind of hands? Sure.
She had been sexually assaulted. For police, the crime scene looked eerily familiar. There were no indications of robbery, and it appeared the killer had entered through a window. But few clues to his identity were found. The victim's husband explained that he discovered his wife around 2 a.m. upon returning from Maryland, where he was a law student. He had no idea who could have done this. He was later cleared as a suspect. Police sensed the two murders were connected. To find out, Chief Medical Examiner Marcella Fierro began examining Dr. Stephanie Harris. She found broken blood vessels in the victim's eyes, called petechial hemorrhages. Like the Donna Doyle case, that suggested Stephanie Harrison had been strangled slowly.
When the victims were examined, there were certain patterns of injuries that were common, and those patterns included evidence of restraint, evidence of strangulation, evidence of injury that took place over a period of time, which was very disturbing because it would indicate a pattern of torture.
The similarities between the crimes led authorities to believe that the same sadistic killer had committed both murders.
When you do autopsies, you get some insight into the nature of the person who committed the crimes. It was apparent from the injuries, from the restraints, and from their physical findings that these were very cruel deaths, and that they were committed by somebody who enjoyed doing it.
The biological evidence recovered from Stephanie Harrison was sent to forensic serologists. An analysis revealed that those samples and the ones collected from Donna Doyle shared the same blood type. Both were type O.
Okay, folks, let's fall in.
Richmond police were certain that the same killer, dubbed by the press as the South Side Strangler, had committed both murders.
We've got the evening watch. Our target is
And having found no obvious connection between the two victims, it appeared he chose his victims randomly. They feared he would strike again. The question now was where and when.
Has, which is known as the River Channel.
They got their answer 2 months later. On November 22, 1987, police just a few miles outside of Richmond in Chesterfield County were dispatched to the scene of a murder. The victim, 15-year-old Dawn Chang, had been viciously raped and strangled in her bedroom. Like the other cases, the perpetrator had entered the bedroom through the window.
Here's what we got, the 8.
Strangely, investigators found a figure 8 painted on the victim's body. But aside from a few stray hairs, little physical evidence was recovered. However, the hairs were enough for authorities to conclude that Dawn Chang had been the South Side Strangler's third victim. Unlike the other victims, Dawn was a teenager. She was Asian, and she didn't live alone. In fact, her parents were sleeping in the next room at the time of the murder.
How old was she?
They never heard a thing.
15.
They described their daughter as a typical teenager.
It's a recent picture.
Okay, it's time for me to get back to work.
You have a lot of work to do?
Yes.
They last saw her the night before.
Go study.
After dinner, Dawn said she had some homework to do and planned on going to bed after she finished. She said goodnight and went to her bedroom. The mother discovered her daughter's lifeless body the following morning. Authorities had a serial killer on the loose, and he appeared to be spreading out beyond the Richmond city limits. His ability to avoid detection led police to believe he had done this before. Desperate to generate a lead, Detective Ray Williams contacted police departments throughout the region, looking for any unsolved cases with a similar MO. Less than 100 miles away, in the Washington, D.C. suburb of Arlington, Virginia, he got a hit. There, Detective Joe Horgus of the Arlington County Police Department had several unsolved rapes and murders that went back nearly 3 years. The details of those were frighteningly similar to the murders in Richmond and Chesterfield County. 3 weeks after 15-year-old Dawn Chang's homicide, Arlington County Police had been dispatched to the home of Sandra Thomas.
Watch where we're stepping.
The 34-year-old woman had been discovered raped and murdered in her home. She lived alone, and like the victims in Richmond, she had been strangled with household items. From hairs and biological evidence recovered from the scene, police determined that Sandra Thomas's killer was an African-American male with type O blood. The other unsolved crimes in Arlington with a similar MO had been committed in 1984. At first, it seemed odd to Detective Horgus that the killer would suddenly stop, only to resume 3 years later.
He didn't stop because he's got a girlfriend. He didn't stop because he got married. He stopped because he either relocated, he's dead, and he's not dead if he's doing the other ones, or he's in prison.
Detective Horgus reviewed recent parole and probation records, looking for African-American males who were arrested in Arlington in 1984. Then he found something. In early 1984, a 21-year-old man named Timothy W. Spencer was arrested in connection with a series of breaking and entering and petty thefts. Though those were non-violent crimes, records also indicated he was identified as the prime suspect in a series of unsolved rapes throughout Arlington. However, he was never charged with those crimes. After serving 3 years on the theft charges, Spencer was paroled. And that wasn't all.
His probation officer here in Arlington knew that he was released from prison to a halfway house down in Richmond. And he was released about 2 weeks before the first murder.
If Detective Horgus was right, Timothy Spencer was now the prime suspect in at least 4 murders throughout Virginia. But unless investigators could physically link him to the crimes, he would remain free to kill again. Police in Arlington, Virginia had finally identified a suspect in a series of unsolved rapes and murders that spanned a 3-year period. And those homicides bore an eerie resemblance to a string of serial murders taking place 100 miles away in Richmond.
All right, here's Tucker's hams.
To find out if they were dealing with the same predator, Arlington County Homicide Detective Joe Horgus traveled to Richmond. There, he teamed up with Detective Ray Williams. After comparing the details of all the homicides, there could be little doubt that the same killer had committed all of the crimes. The detectives learned that their prime suspect, Timothy Spencer, had been recently paroled and was currently living in a halfway house in Richmond. According to the director of the house, the suspect was currently out running errands. Detectives asked to see the logbook that contained the times and dates of when a parolee leaves and returns to the house. According to the records, Timothy Spencer had signed himself out on September 18th, October 2nd, and November 21st. Dates that corresponded to the murders in Richmond and Chesterfield County. He had also signed out on November 25th to spend Thanksgiving weekend with his mother in Arlington. Arlington County Detective Joe Horgus realized that Timothy Spencer's mother lived just a few blocks from where the latest victim, Sandra Thomas, had been murdered that same weekend.
What are the odds that 100 miles away, our lady up here that's murdered, M.O. fits identical to theirs down there, and where's Timothy Spencer? He's up here at the same time. Too many coincidences just don't add up. What it adds up to is logic. This is our man.
A short while later, Timothy Spencer returned home. And police were there waiting. The suspected serial killer was taken into custody on suspicion of murder.
Hand behind your back. He'll tell you just a second here.
A search of his room at the halfway house failed to produce any hard evidence linking him to the murders. But on his bed, they discovered a drawing of a figure 8, similar to the one found painted on the body of 15-year-old Dawn Chang.
I'm gonna show you a couple
Under
pictures
questioning,
here, so
Spencer admitted nothing.
jog your memory a little bit. Just see if you recognize these folks, okay? Do you know that person? No.
He claimed to have no knowledge about any rapes or murders.
Have you ever been to
And he denied drawing the figure 8 found on his bed. Detectives sensed he was lying, and now they looked to the forensic evidence for proof. Hair and blood samples were collected from the suspect. At the Virginia Division of Forensic Science, criminalists compared the hairs taken from Spencer to those recovered from several of the crime scenes. The shape, size, color, and texture of the hairs were identical. Though Timothy Spencer had type O blood, so did millions of other people. For irrefutable proof that he was the Southside Strangler, examiners turned to a newly developed, more sophisticated type of analysis called DNA testing. The testing revealed that the genetic profile of the suspect was identical to the ones generated from the biological evidence left behind at 4 murder scenes. The chances that the killer was someone other than Timothy Spencer were nearly 900 million to 1. He was charged with 4 counts of murder. Investigators theorize that after randomly choosing his prey, Spencer, an experienced burglar, would slip silently through his victims' windows. Once inside, he raped and strangled them. Timothy Spencer was sentenced to death for the murders of Donna Doyle, Dr. Stephanie Harrison, and Dawn Chang in Richmond, and for the death of Sandra Thomas in Arlington. He was the first person in the United States to be executed on the basis of DNA fingerprinting. For Richmond homicide detective Ray Williams, the new forensic technology could not have come along at a better time.
Were it not for DNA evidence, Timothy Spencer would have never been convicted. See, when you put a case before a jury, the jury has to see, touch, feel, and hear. We didn't have a whole lot of things for them to see, touch, feel, and hear, other than DNA. And that DNA spoke for itself.
Some killers require no motive at all to commit their crimes. And for homicide detectives, identifying a suspect can be a challenge. In those cases, they must rely on the physical evidence to expose a killer who has set his sights on random targets. In rural Michigan, a search for a missing man ends in cold-blooded murder. Investigators call on a team of forensic scientists to establish the victim's time of death and bring his killer to justice. In Salinas, California, a couple finds a skeleton in a shallow grave under their house. A missing persons report, filed 14 years earlier, may have covered up a murder. Bones of lost victims may lie hidden for years. Time and the elements can destroy evidence. When those remains are finally discovered, the deceased have a chance to speak, and the tales they tell reveal grave secrets. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. The quiet agricultural town of Salinas, California, is known for its abundant produce. A town of hard-working people, it hardly seems the place for a murder. But on January 14th, 1998, the owners of a house discovered something that would change that impression forever. Jim Olson told his wife Sandra and her sister that he discovered something strange in the crawl space under the house while installing heating ducts.
I just happened to look over and there's like a pair of shoes.
He found a pair of tennis shoes sticking out of the dirt, with the toes pointing upwards.
I'm not joking.
I want to see it.
Sure.
That's creepy.
He was too large to reach them in the cramped space. To Jim, it looked as if someone may have been buried in a shallow grave.
I just got out of there. I didn't want to see.
I want to see what's that.
They all hoped it was a prank.
They're directly back there, right under the kitchen.
We can't just leave them down there. It's creepy.
Yeah, we can.
You know what? I'll go.
But Sandra volunteered to check, just to make sure.
Okay, be careful. Slide over here.
Straight back toward the kitchen. See it?
Something was holding the shoes firmly in place.
It's stuck on something.
In the dim light, Sandra could see that the shoes were attached to a skeleton. Jim called 911. Officers from the Salinas Police Department responded to the call. Sergeant Miller and Detective McLaughlin were among the responding officers. Police confirmed that the bones were human, and the area was declared a crime scene.
right, Dr. Galloway, as you can see, this is exactly how we found it.
To properly preserve the site and recover the skeletal remains, investigators called in Dr. Allison Galloway, a forensic anthropologist at the University of California, Santa Cruz campus. Remarkably, Galloway found the skeleton to be complete and undisturbed by animals. The initial examination determined that the bones were likely male and that they had been there for a number of years.
We could tell that the body had been there for quite a while. There was no odor, there was no grease in the bone, there was no soft tissue left. So we say usually that takes about 5 years minimum, but it then can go anywhere up to 50 years. So we have quite a long range. We did see a lot of exfoliation of the bone. The bone itself wasn't disintegrating, but it was in a very protected environment.
Decomposed jeans and underwear suggested the victim had been fully clothed at the time of his death and burial. As Galloway carefully sifted through the remains, she found a .38 caliber bullet. Police now believed they had uncovered a homicide. As they scoured the area around the body, they uncovered some personal items, including a set of keys and a cigarette lighter. Sergeant Miller of the Salinas Police Department spoke with the family that currently owned the house.
A couple of real quick questions. Just pretty much the basics as far as when did you buy the house here?
They said that they had lived there for 2.5 years.
And I got the story just real quick. Let me just run it by and see if I got everything straight.
This was the first time anyone had been in the crawl space.
Push it over.
Now, investigators had to determine who this victim was. Without the victim's identity, police would not be able to track his killer.
I was surprised at how specific they are. I mean, this one's in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
The remains were sent to the UC Santa Cruz Anthropology Lab. There, they believed Dr. Galloway could provide vital information.
I'll get the bone board so we can do stature.
Okay. I'm going to go with the right femur.
Measurements confirmed that the remains were that of an adolescent male of European descent.
Okay,
He was approximately 5 feet 10 inches tall.
To 5'10". Okay.
The bullet found among the remains indicated the victim had been shot.
The gladiolus and the xiphoid. On the sternal bodies.
To verify the cause of death, Dr. Galloway looked for any peculiarities on the bones.
Let's take a look at the skull here.
She discovered 2 gunshot holes in the victim's skull.
So, it looks like we have 2 entry wounds over here. This victim, we had a whole series of injuries. We had 2 gunshot injuries to the head, and at least 1 and possibly 2 gunshot injuries to the rest of the body. The first of the head ones came in on the right side, sort of around the ear, and probably exited through the left eye. And then the second injury came in a little bit further forward, and that moved and came out on this side over here.
There was also evidence of at least 1 entry wound to the victim's back.
And rib 7, we also have some breaking. Perimortem. This is around death.
Dr. Galloway reported her findings to Sergeant Miller.
Okay, Doctor. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
He cross-referenced the address where the victim was found with missing persons reports dating back from 5 years earlier. He came up with a promising match. A teenage boy named Chris DeNoyer was reported missing from the same residence in 1984. Sergeant Miller reviewed the report. There was a picture on file, and Dr. Galloway's assessment was consistent with the missing boy's description.
Chris DeNoyer was last seen January 13th, 1984, and it was his mother who had notified police that, in fact, her son was missing at that time.
Investigators obtained Chris's dental records. Dr. Kevin Landon performed the analysis. He compared the x-rays from Chris's file to slides of the victim's dental remains. He noticed something.
I found that there was a retainer, an orthodontic type retainer on the lower jaw extending from his left canine tooth to his right canine tooth with an orthodontic band around it. During the time that this individual was alive, that was a standard type of orthodontic retainer to place. Nowadays they are made a little different, bonded in the back of the teeth so that they're not so visible.
Dr. Landon had found a positive match.
I concluded that the dental remains from this individual under the house matched the dental records that I received.
Investigators finally had a name and a face for their victim. Now they needed to find out who had murdered Chris DeNoyer. But after 14 years, the killer's trail was cold. Little evidence remained. Police were uncertain they would ever solve this case. Police in Salinas, California struggled to track the killer of Chris DeNoyer, whose body was found 14 years after he was reported missing. A .38 caliber bullet was the only evidence the killer left behind.
Let's just check these vents out here and make sure there's...
Investigators now needed to reconstruct the events that led up to his death. First, they wanted to make sure there was no access to the crawl space from the outside of the house. They found none.
There's only one way in and one way out. So the two possible scenarios are either it's a stranger or it's somebody that lives in the residence. Now, if you try to play out the stranger scenario, you'd have to say the stranger came into the house, murdered Chris, and then hoped that they would have enough time to drag this body into their house, dig a grave, cover it over, and crawl out before anyone comes home.
And that didn't seem likely to the police.
And even this one's even covered. In my mind, the people that were suspects in this case were anyone that had access and control to the residence in January of 1984.
And the only access was from inside.
You know, I'm not sure.
But Sergeant Miller wanted to be certain that Chris hadn't been murdered after he went missing. He made another call to Dr. Kevin Landon.
One of the questions that Detective Andy Miller of the Salinas Police Department asked of me was that would it have been possible for Christopher to have actually run away, returned a few years later, possibly been murdered by someone and placed under the house? And I could tell him that that was impossible due to the fact that his wisdom teeth had not developed any further.
It was proof that Chris was murdered just before the missing persons report was filed.
Thank you very much.
The police report indicated that Chris had a girlfriend at the time of his disappearance. They hoped she could give some insight into the family.
So she was the first person that we decided to contact, primarily because since she didn't live in the house, she wasn't as likely in our eyes to be a suspect.
She was dismayed to hear the news of Chris's death. She stated she first met Chris DeNoyer in 1983. They dated up until his disappearance in '84. Chris, she said, was her first love. When asked about Chris's relationship with his parents, she said that Chris and his stepfather, Jackson Viarta, constantly fought. Viarta was always on him about something. She said she never believed Chris ran away. He wouldn't have left without saying goodbye to her.
Hi, Mrs. Viarta. Detective Miller from Salinas PD. We talked on the phone. Thank you.
Investigators decided it was time to speak with Chris's mother.
This is about your son, Christopher Denoyer.
Have you found him?
They tracked her down at her current residence. She was shocked by the news that Chris's body had been found.
It's very important that we begin our investigation and try to find.
On the day Chris disappeared, she was at work. Her husband, Jackson Viarta, called her and told her that Chris had run away. She had been convinced he was still alive. In fact, they had received a telegram from him a few days after he disappeared. Chris, she said, was an average teenager, but they had their problems with him. He and his sister were having trouble adjusting to life with her new husband, Jackson Viarta. Investigators asked if anyone in the family owned a gun. She said that Jackson Viarta had one for home security, but she didn't know the kind. Miller didn't believe that Chris's mother had anything to do with the murder.
At the time of this murder, Chris's mother was pregnant, and she's a heavy-set woman to begin with, so the idea of her going through this very small crawl space and digging, a 6-foot trench under her house and dragging a 180-pound victim under there, that's pretty much out of the question.
But they did have a suspect in mind. Chris's stepfather, Jackson Viarta.
Specific there, right. And you can see from the crime scene sketch here that this body. We felt that the only person that could possibly benefit from burying a body underneath a residence was the person who was in control of that residence, and in this case, that's Jackson Viarta.
Viarta worked for the telephone company. They found him on his route. As investigators approached, they noticed he had the right size and build to dig the 6-foot trench in the crawl space.
We're from Salinas PD.
Mr. Viarta, I already talked to your supervisor.
He agreed to accompany them in for questioning. He was cooperative and admitted that he and Chris had had their troubles. But he said that was normal. Teenagers often have conflicts with their step-parents.
One other thing I'd like to explain to you. A lot of times when people come down to the police department.
Viarta said he worked from noon to 8 p.m. on the day Chris disappeared. When he got home, his wife told him that Chris had run away.
This is Detective Miller.
His story contradicted what his wife had told investigators earlier.
Rifle.
Anything else?
A few days later, he said, they received a mailgram from Chris saying he was sorry for all the trouble he had caused and that he had moved out. Investigators were suspicious. Viarta admitted that he had 2 guns, a .22 caliber rifle and a .38 caliber revolver. The caliber of the handgun interested Sergeant Miller.
The rounds we'd found in the grave, that Chris had been murdered with a .38 caliber weapon. So it was a very significant piece of information.
The police needed to get a search warrant to examine the revolver. They went to Viarta's house to prevent him from entering and removing the handgun. With a warrant in hand, police searched the home where Viarta now lived. They collected the .38 caliber revolver and some ammunition.
I hear that his birthplace was L.A. I don't
While they waited for the ballistics testing to be completed, they checked out Viarta's story. They secured all of his personal records for January of 1984.
So we've got to look at this. We've got a call.
There was one small detail that piqued their interest.
We've got a call at 1. Look at this. Hey, Bob. Yeah. Come here and take a look at this.
The mailgram that was supposedly sent by Chris 3 days after he disappeared was ordered from and billed to Viarta's home phone.
So this is dynamite. Right. But we've got to find
Chris had already been murdered.
Was calling these numbers.
Police knew that Viarta had written it.
So there was definitely somebody home. The one sentence in the mailgram that completely gave it away that Jackson was the author was when the statement was that in some ways Jackson was right. And you're talking about a 16-year-old kid who hated his stepfather. Is he going to write in this letter that he thinks that his stepfather was right? The only person that would write that was Jackson. So the whole idea of the mailgram right from the beginning was preposterous. 84.
The circumstantial evidence against Jackson Viarta was mounting.
The house on Navajo Drive.
But investigators would need one more piece of evidence to make an arrest. Detectives in Salinas, California had identified Jackson Viarta as the prime suspect in the murder of his teenage stepson, Chris DeNoyer. But they still needed physical evidence to link him to the scene of the crime. A .38 caliber revolver and ammunition were collected during a search of his house. Scott Armstrong, senior criminalist with the California State Department of Justice, examined the gun. He fired the weapon into a water tank. And collected the spent bullets.
The gun, whether it's a revolver or a pistol, will have two kinds of markings that they impress on the bullet: class characteristics and individual characteristics. The class characteristics would be things that would be common to all guns of that make and manufacture.
The individual characteristics are unique markings called lands and grooves, which are left on a bullet as it travels through the gun barrel. They are as individual as fingerprints. Using a comparison microscope, he compared the bullets from the crime scene to the bullets fired from Viarta's weapon side by side. The bullets matched.
There were class markings and individual markings that were sufficient that I could identify the bullet as having been fired from the revolver.
It was the hard evidence investigators needed.
Mr. Viarta, with your left hand, slowly reach out and open the door from the outside. Slowly step out of the vehicle and face away from me. Take 2 steps to your left. Stop. Put your hands behind your back and interlace your fingers. Get down on your knees.
On February 6, 1999, Jackson Viarta was arrested for the murder of Chris DeNoyer 15 years earlier. Under questioning, he denied all charges and maintained his innocence. At trial, investigators presented a videotape that proved it wasn't likely an outsider broke into the home, killed Chris, and then buried him in the crawl space. An officer matching Viarta's physical description dug a hole in the confined area. The experiment was timed. It took a little over an hour.
So getting back to the fact that if an outsider had come into this place, done the murder, and decided this was how he was going to dispose of the body, he would have had to commit himself to a minimum of 1 hour in sort of the danger zone, because if someone had come home while he was there, they would have been discovered.
Based on the evidence, investigators believe Jackson Viarta and Chris argued that day.
You're going to give me that respect. I'm not getting respect. Yes, you are. You're not my father. You're going to give me that respect, whether you like it or not.
In a rage, Viarta grabbed his .38 caliber gun and shot Chris twice in the head and once in the chest. Then, he hid his body in the crawl space under the house.
Get over here.
On February 1st, 2000, Jackson Viarta was convicted of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 17 years to life. Jackson Viarta thought that burying his victim under the house would permanently conceal the evidence of his crime. But some killers believe time and the elements will erase the evidence for them. In June 1995, the Lansing Police Department in Michigan was working a difficult case. Detective Jay Trost led the investigation.
Got a missing person, has been missing quite some time. We're looking, I got a photo of here I want to pass out, see if anyone here can locate this guy or if everyone...
29-year-old Mark Bosom had vanished.
Anyone got any questions on him or anything like that?
Do you know if he's supposed to be armed with any type of...
Well, we believe he's more of a victim. We don't suspect he'd be armed, but you never know, so be careful. At this point, I wouldn't really consider it.
Mark's wife, Cindy, reported him missing 3 weeks earlier.
For him, if you find anything about him, anyone that knows him, any information you might think's pertinent, just give me a call or leave me a message and I'll get back with you. He's been missing for...
The longer Mark was missing, the more Detective Trost suspected foul play. He needed to find out if anyone had seen him or knew of his whereabouts. Officers were sent to interview his relatives, friends, and acquaintances. They learned that the day before Mark disappeared, he cashed his income tax check and was paid from his job. But dozens of interviews turned up nothing else. The police could find no one who'd heard from him since his disappearance.
He wasn't seen anywhere, couldn't find anyone that had any kind of contact. We couldn't even find anyone that had even seen him or could remember seeing him, anything like that. So he just like vanished.
Sergeant Mark Murray was eager to speak with Mark Bosom's wife, Cindy, the last person known to have seen him. She admitted to him that she and her husband had their problems and were separated as a result, but claimed that both of them wanted to save the marriage.
She appeared to me to be a very loving and caring mother. She and Mark had a daughter, and she seemed to be trying to keep the family together. So they were trying to iron out their differences and get things worked out and patched up.
She told the sergeant that a few nights before his disappearance, Mark visited her at the bowling alley where she worked as a waitress. When he arrived, a man named Tom Hart was talking to her. Mark was uncomfortable with Hart and believed that he was interested in more than just a friendship with his wife. According to Cindy, Hart was infatuated with her. She told Sergeant Murray that on several occasions she noticed Hart following her after work. In fact, her husband insisted that she take out a restraining order against him. But Cindy considered Hart a friend and couldn't believe that he had anything to do with Mark's disappearance. Sergeant Murray wasn't so sure.
Hey guys, how's it going? What I thought was that led a little more credibility to the fact that some foul play could have been involved in his gone missing, as opposed to him just leaving on his own.
Investigators decided to take a closer look at Tom Hart. When questioned by investigators, Hart was cooperative. The 52-year-old claimed that he and Cindy Bosom had more than a friendly relationship. He said that Cindy was planning on divorcing her estranged husband and moving in with him, but was apprehensive about telling Mark. Hart admitted that the last time he saw Mark was the night before he disappeared. He had met with him in person to inform him of their intentions. While Mark wasn't happy about this news, the conversation ended cordially. In fact, he had asked Hart for a ride to a nearby convenience store. Hart agreed and dropped him off. As Mark walked toward the store, he approached two men who were standing outside. He seemed to know them. When Hart asked if he wanted a ride back, Mark declined, saying he'd get one later. That was the last time he saw him. Police asked if he would be willing to take a polygraph test. Though he insisted he had nothing to hide, Hart refused, claiming he had no idea where Mark Bosom was. Investigators didn't believe him.
By his tone and his mannerisms and his basically, it's not that he wouldn't answer questions, but he was very evasive in his answers. He wasn't real forthcoming with a lot of information. We had to pry everything out of him. He would give you an answer to a question, but he never gave you any meat.
Investigators knew Hart was covering up for something. And there was still no evidence of a crime. Police in Lansing, Michigan worked to solve the missing persons case of 29-year-old Mark Bosom. Tom Hart, the last person to see him the night he disappeared, said he dropped Mark off at a convenience store. Investigators doubted his story. They contacted the manager of the convenience store to see if there was a surveillance camera in the parking lot. There wasn't one. And no one remembered seeing either man that night. With no evidence of a crime and only their suspicions that Tom Hart was involved in Mark's disappearance, investigators met to discuss their next move. The investigation was going nowhere. But then they caught a break.
At that point, there was some information that Tom Hart owned a farm. Well, from the time that Mark Bosom came up missing to like within a week and a half, Tom Hart decided to till up his land.
If Hart was involved in Mark Bosom's disappearance, it was also likely he would hide the evidence.
He could have taken him out to the farm and disposed of the body and tilled him up in the soil.
With the assistance of the Michigan State Police, Sergeant Murray conducted an air reconnaissance of Tom Hart's farm.
We were looking for where the ground had been tilled up and disturbed. Maybe a grave had been dug, that the furrows would be different in the ground.
It was a promising lead. But after hours of searching, there was no evidence of a burial or a recent grave. Without a search warrant, all investigators could do was wait.
After approximately a month, there was nothing, and on a missing case like this, it starts to go cold. There wasn't a whole lot more that could be done. What we needed to do is either find him alive or dead, and then go from there. We were unable to find anything.
The investigation had hit a dead end. Trost had been down this road before and knew that someday a clue would turn up. He just had to be patient. Almost a year and a half later, in nearby Shiawassee County, a man walking his dog made a terrible discovery.
Oh my God.
Hidden among some brush lay a human skull. He called the police. Detective Trost and crime scene technicians from the Lansing Police Department responded. Investigators hoped this was the lead they had been waiting for. Until now, they had a suspect, but no hard evidence of a crime. They collected the decomposed skull, then carefully searched the area.
How long ago would you say you got here? How long has it been?
Nearby, they recovered articles of clothing, a blood-stained blanket, and more human remains. They also found a spent .22 caliber bullet casing. From the level of decomposition, vines that had grown through the tattered clothing, and some insect larvae, they determined that the body had been there for some time. But their search of the area yielded no clues to the victim's identity. Investigators forwarded the skeletal remains to Michigan State University for analysis.
Would you agree that's a male characteristic, Michael?
There, forensic anthropologist Dr. Norman Sauer looked to the bones to help establish the person's identity.
Border of the eye orbit right along here.
After analyzing the shape and dimension of brow ridges on the skull, Dr. Sauer concluded that the victim was male, likely in his late 20s to early 30s. From the measurements of the femur, he determined the individual stood between 5 feet 6 inches and 5 feet 9 inches tall. He also discovered marks on one of the vertebrae, evidence that this victim had been shot in the chest.
Our conclusion was that this was probably a homicide.
David, 314, the Central.
But detectives couldn't be certain that this victim was the long-missing Mark Bosom. The physical description roughly matched Bosom's, but it also matched countless other missing persons. To catch the killer and determine who the victim was, investigators would have to find a way to pinpoint exactly when this victim died.
Not too bad. Just getting some dental records. Oh, it is frustrating, very frustrating. At this point, there's no way for us to say for sure who this person is.
The victim's clothing and the blanket recovered from the crime scene were sent to forensic entomologist Dr. Richard Merritt. As an expert in insect growth and development, Dr. Merritt analyzes the life cycles of bugs found on a corpse and estimates how much time has elapsed since a person's death.
The time of death can be determined using the life cycle of an insect. So basically when someone dies, the insects are attracted immediately to the body within hours.
Dr. Merritt began by identifying each of the species found on the shirt and blanket. Among the various insects present, Dr. Merritt observed an adult parasitic wasp. Though other insects are attracted to a corpse within 24 hours of death, research has shown that wasps will not appear and lay their eggs for several months. Then it takes time for the wasp larvae to hatch and mature into adults. Adding in the wasp's maturation process, Dr. Merritt narrowed down this victim's time of death.
The entomological findings showed that this body had been around from 4 to 8 months, maybe longer, since the person died.
Dr. Merritt's findings held promise. This victim hadn't been killed recently. Forensic botanist Dr. Frank Ewers analyzed the grapevines found growing through the victim's clothing. By examining the internal structure of the wood stems, Dr. Ewers was able to calculate the age of the vine.
Here you can see a growth ring. From this, we can tell that there was quite a lot of growth the previous year. So that meant that it had to be at least 15 months old. And so it told us that the body had to be there at least 15 months.
I haven't got any new information from anybody.
It was the break investigators were waiting for. Cindy Bosom put them in touch with Mark's dentist.
Statements here, what the people had said at the party store.
His dental records were sent to anthropologist Dr. Norman Sauer. Dr. Sauer compared Mark's dental x-rays with the post-mortem x-rays taken from the victim's remains.
Once the police had an idea who the remains belonged to, they went to that person's dentist and were able to get a hold of dental records and dental x-rays. And that allowed us to do a side-by-side comparison and positively identify the remains as those of Mark Allen Bosom.
With the help of forensic examiners, police had finally identified the victim. Now they needed to tie Tom Hart to the crime. Looking for answers, they began questioning all known associates of the suspect.
And then let me know what happens.
Will do.
An acquaintance of Hart's told police that Hart owned a .22 caliber gun. In fact, he and Hart had used such a gun for target practice prior to Mark Bosom's disappearance.
Man, you show me how it's done.
Okay, I will. Now, just watch the old timer. I'll show you how it's done. Okay, great. See you.
The information was enough to get a warrant to search Hart's property. Investigators paid particular attention to Tom Hart's gun collection. They recovered a Winchester Model 94 and a Remington 16-gauge shotgun. Detective Jay Trost knew that neither gun was of the caliber used in the homicide.
I was looking for a .22 handgun, something like that. I did collect some rifles. I didn't really, in my heart, believe that they were involved, but you got to collect everything, and sometimes stories change. So we took what we could find, but there wasn't much there.
18 months after Mark Bosom's murder, investigators had a suspect, but still no evidence against him. In Lansing, Michigan, police were investigating the murder of Mark Bosom. Their suspect, Thomas Hart, was obsessed with Mark's estranged wife. Police had a motive, but no evidence. A search of his property turned up nothing. Investigators learned that the vehicle Hart drove at the time of Mark Bosom's disappearance was parked outside his work. They impounded it for a closer inspection.
Tom, Detective Murray, you remember me? Here's a search warrant. We're taking your vehicle in for processing.
Although the car had been thoroughly cleaned, they detected trace amounts of blood.
When we went through it, we were able to determine with luminol that there was actually blood on the passenger seat.
And that wasn't all. When they cut the seat open, they discovered that the cushion below was covered with dried blood.
It had been there a year and a half, and it was degraded. I mean, it smelled like degraded blood. When you looked down, I went, whoa. I was expecting little trace amounts of blood. There was like a big puddle of dried blood. So with that was very, very good and exciting evidence for me, because now with this blood, we got somewhere to go. We can figure out whose blood it is. I'm assuming at this time that it's probably Mark Bosom's blood. Now I got to figure out how to get that analyzed.
Investigators knew that if both parents were alive, a DNA match could be established.
I knew that the mother was alive. I called her, and she was able to tell me that the father wasn't back alive. So we actually drew blood from both those people. It was turned over to the crime lab along with the evidence they had at the scene, and they were able to analyze that and hopefully get DNA.
They were in luck. It was a match.
The blood in the car matches both parents' blood, which in turn is Mark Bosom blood. So now we got an exact match. And in my mind right now, we got enough probably to get an arrest warrant for murder.
Police finally had the evidence they needed to arrest Tom Hart. But Hart was hiding out at his farm. Because of his violent history, they didn't want to rush the house. And it was only a matter of time before he came out. Police watched and waited.
He was pretty much aware that there was a warrant out for him by now, and he was hiding out.
Looks like he's going to the barn.
He actually walked out, got in the vehicle, and left, and he didn't even go out on the road. I'm guessing if he didn't go out on the road, maybe he thought the police weren't going to get him. But he drove through the field. When they saw that, they just swooped in on him.
Keep your hands where we can see them. Put your hands on top of your head. Turn and face the female officer. Now walk backwards towards me. Walk backwards towards me. That's it. Keep walking. Keep walking. Get to the corner of the car and stop.
He was arrested for the first-degree murder of Mark Bosom.
Tom, we have a warrant for your arrest.
Hey, have a seat, please.
At the police department, Tom Hart was informed of his rights.
You understand you've been arrested for first-degree murder. Before we get into that, I'll talk to you about that.
He refused to answer any questions and demanded his attorney.
We'll get you your attorney. We're ready. If we can get someone to come in here. Ready, you can take him down to the jail. Right up there against the window.
He was placed in the Lansing County Jail to await trial.
Take him downtown.
When it became clear that Cindy Bosom only wanted to be friends, a jealous Hart confronted Mark Bosom. He lured him into his car. Then he drove Mark Bosom to a deserted area where he shot the unsuspecting victim in the neck. Hart disposed of the body, believing that no one would find it. On January 9, 1998, Thomas Hart was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Some killers believe they can get away with murder. Hiding a body may seem like the best plan, but even when many years have passed and only bones remain, forensic science can find the truth and uncover grave secrets.